The morning sun was shining bright as Maya stepped out of her old car and looked up at the Grand Vista Hotel. She had been dreaming about this moment for weeks. After 7 long years of studying law, working part-time jobs, and eating instant noodles almost every day, she had finally graduated. This weekend was going to be her gift to herself. Maya had saved money for 3 months just to afford 2 nights at this fancy place. She had seen pictures online and read all the reviews. People said it was the most beautiful hotel in the city, with marble floors, crystal lights, and service that made you feel like royalty. She wanted to experience that feeling, even if it was just for 1 weekend. She pulled her small suitcase behind her and walked toward the big glass doors. The doorman barely looked at her as she passed. Maya was wearing her favorite jeans and a comfortable sweater. She looked like any other college student, which is exactly what she was until last week when she got her law degree. Inside the hotel, Maya's eyes went wide. Everything was even more beautiful than in the pictures. The ceiling was so high she had to crane her neck to see the top. There were fresh flowers everywhere, and the smell reminded her of her grandmother's garden. Soft music played in the background, and people in expensive clothes walked around like they owned the place. Maya walked to the front desk, her heart beating fast with excitement. Behind the desk stood a tall man in a perfect suit. His name tag said Richard Whitmore, manager. She had practiced what she would say during the drive here. She wanted to sound confident and sophisticated. "Good afternoon," Maya said with a big smile. "I have a reservation for Maya Chen. I'll be staying for 2 nights." Richard looked up from his computer screen and his eyes immediately scanned Maya from head to toe. His friendly manager smile disappeared in seconds. Maya noticed the change but thought maybe he was just having a busy day. "Let me check," Richard said, but his voice was different now, cold. He typed something on his computer, but Maya could see he wasn't really looking at anything. He was just pretending to be busy. After what felt like forever, Richard looked up, with a frown. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be some kind of problem with your reservation." Maya felt her stomach drop. "What kind of problem? I booked this room 3 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email right here." She quickly pulled out her phone and showed him the booking confirmation. Richard barely glanced at the screen. "Our system shows that room is no longer available. There must have been some kind of error." "But how is that possible?" Maya asked, trying to stay calm. "I paid a deposit. I have the receipt for everything." Other people at the front desk started looking their way. Maya felt her cheeks getting warm. This wasn't how she had imagined this moment would go. "Look," Richard said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. "Maybe you would be more comfortable at one of the budget places down the street. There's a nice little motel about 10 minutes from here, much more suitable for someone like you." Maya felt like someone had just slapped her. The way he said, "someone like you," made her skin crawl. She looked around and noticed that every single guest in the lobby was dressed in expensive clothes, but that shouldn't matter, right? She had a valid reservation and money to pay for her room. "I don't understand," Maya said, her voice starting to shake a little. "I made this reservation legally. I paid the deposit. Why are you telling me to go somewhere else?" Richard's eyes got narrow. "Miss, I think there might be some confusion about what kind of establishment this is. The Grand Vista Hotel maintains certain standards. We cater to a very specific type of clientele." Maya knew exactly what he meant, and it made her feel sick. But she wasn't going to give up that easily. She had worked too hard and saved too much money for this weekend. "Sir, I understand this is an upscale hotel. That's exactly why I chose to stay here. I'm a law school graduate and I can afford to pay for my room. Here's my credit card." Maya pulled out her wallet and showed him her credit card and ID. Richard looked at the credit card like it was something dirty. "I'm going to need to verify this card. There have been a lot of problems lately with fraudulent payments." Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying you think my credit card is fake?" "I'm not saying anything," Richard replied. "I'm just following standard hotel policy. We have to be very careful about who we allow to stay here." By now, several other guests had stopped what they were doing to watch the conversation. Maya felt like she was on display in the worst possible way. She could hear people whispering to each other. Richard made a big show of examining Maya's credit card and ID. He held them up to the light, checked the back, and even called someone on the phone. Maya stood there feeling smaller and smaller with each passing minute. "I'm sorry," Richard finally said, handing back her cards. "But I'm not comfortable processing this reservation. Like I said, there are other places that might be better suited for your needs." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. "This is discrimination," she said quietly. "You can't refuse service to someone just because of how they look." Richard's face got red. "Miss, I suggest you lower your voice. You're causing a disturbance. And I want you to know that this hotel has every right to refuse service to anyone we feel might not fit with our atmosphere." "What do you mean by atmosphere?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "I think you know exactly what I mean," Richard said. "Now, I'm going to ask you politely one more time to leave. If you refuse, I'll have to call security." Maya looked around the lobby. Everyone was staring at her now. Some people looked uncomfortable, like they knew what was happening was wrong. But nobody said anything. Nobody tried to help her. She thought about all the money she had saved, all the excitement she had felt driving here, all the dreams she had about relaxing in a beautiful room and ordering room service and feeling special for just one weekend. "Fine," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll leave." But as she turned to go, Richard wasn't done. "And miss, next time, maybe call ahead to make sure a place is appropriate for you before you waste everyone's time." Those words hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. She turned around one more time, hoping to see some sign of decency in Richard's face. But all she saw was coldness and satisfaction. Maya walked toward the door, pulling her suitcase behind her. Every step felt like it took forever. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her leave. When she finally made it outside, she leaned against her car and took deep breaths. She sat in her car for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. She kept thinking about Richard's words and the way he had looked at her. She kept wondering if maybe she had done something wrong, even though she knew she hadn't. Finally, Maya started her car and drove away from the Grand Vista Hotel. She didn't go to the motel Richard had suggested. Instead, she drove straight home to her small apartment. She spent the rest of the weekend inside, trying to forget about the most humiliating experience of her life. Maya never told anyone what happened that day. Not her parents, not her best friends, not anyone. She was too embarrassed and hurt. She convinced herself that maybe it was better to just move on and pretend it never happened. But deep down, Maya knew she would never forget the way Richard Whitmore had made her feel that day. She would never forget how it felt to be judged and rejected just for being herself. And she would never forget the lesson she learned about how some people in this world still saw her as less than human, no matter how hard she worked or how much she achieved. Maya thought the worst part was over when she agreed to leave the hotel. She was wrong. As she turned to walk away, Richard called out loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "Security! We need assistance at the front desk immediately." Maya stopped in her tracks. Her heart started beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She turned around slowly, hoping this was some kind of mistake. "Sir, I said I would leave. I'm not causing any trouble." Richard had a cold smile on his face now. "I'm sorry, but hotel policy requires that we verify the identity of anyone who attempts to use suspicious payment methods. We need to make sure everything is legitimate before you go." Two security guards appeared from somewhere behind the lobby. They were both big men wearing dark uniforms with badges and walkie-talkies. Maya felt like she was shrinking as they walked toward her. "Is there a problem here?" one of the guards asked Richard. "This young lady tried to check in with what appears to be questionable documentation. I need you to escort her out, but first we should probably verify her belongings according to our security protocols." Maya's mouth fell open. "Questionable documentation? You just looked at my credit card and ID. They're completely real." But the security guards weren't listening to her. They were only listening to Richard. Maya realized that in their eyes she was already guilty of something, even though she had done absolutely nothing wrong. "Miss, we're going to need you to step over here," one of the guards said, pointing to an area near the front windows where everyone could see. Maya looked around the lobby. More people had gathered now. Some were pretending to read newspapers or check their phones, but she could tell they were all watching her. A few people had their phones out, and she wondered if they were recording what was happening. "This is completely unnecessary," Maya said, but her voice sounded small and scared now. "I haven't done anything wrong. Ma'am, please cooperate and this will be over quickly," the guard said. Maya had no choice. She walked to where they pointed, pulling her suitcase behind her. She felt like she was walking to her own execution. Every step felt heavy, and she could feel tears starting to build up behind her eyes. Richard followed them, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've had several incidents recently with people trying to use stolen credit cards or fake identification. The Grand Vista Hotel takes security very seriously. We have to protect our legitimate guests." The way he said, "legitimate guests," made Maya feel sick. She knew he was talking about her, making her sound like some kind of criminal in front of all these people. "Sir, my identification is real. My credit card is mine. I can call my bank right now if you want to verify it." "That won't be necessary," Richard said. "We have our own procedures to follow." One of the security guards opened Maya's suitcase right there in the lobby. Maya felt her face burning with shame as her personal belongings were spread out for everyone to see. Her clothes, her toiletries, her books, everything she had packed for what was supposed to be a celebration weekend. "What exactly are you looking for?" Maya asked. "Just making sure everything is legitimate," the guard replied, going through her things like she was a suspected thief. People in the lobby were definitely staring now. Maya could hear whispers and see people pointing. Some looked uncomfortable, like they knew this was wrong. But nobody said anything to help her. Nobody stood up for her. Richard stood nearby with his arms crossed, watching the whole thing with satisfaction. "You understand? We have to be very careful about who we allow in our establishment. The Grand Vista Hotel has a reputation to maintain." Maya wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out of there as fast as she could. But the security guards hadn't finished going through her belongings yet, so she had to stand there and endure the humiliation. "These look like expensive clothes for someone who—" Richard started to say, then stopped himself. But Maya knew what he was thinking. Someone who looks like her shouldn't be able to afford nice things. "I work hard for everything I have," Maya said quietly. "I'm sure you do," Richard replied, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe her. The security guard found Maya's law school diploma in her suitcase. He held it up and showed it to Richard. "Says here she graduated from law school." Richard looked at the diploma like it was fake too. Anyone can print something like that these days. "We can't be too careful." Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's my real diploma. I just graduated last week. I worked 7 years to get that degree." "Well, congratulations," Richard said, but he didn't sound like he meant it. "But having a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean someone belongs in a place like this." Maya felt like she had been slapped in the face. She had worked so hard for that diploma. She had sacrificed so much, worked multiple jobs, studied until her eyes hurt, all so she could build a better life for herself. And this man was treating it like it meant nothing. The security guards finished going through her belongings and started putting them back in her suitcase. But they did it carelessly, shoving things in without any respect for her personal items. "Everything seems to be in order," one of the guards said to Richard. "Good. Now please escort her out and make sure she understands that she's not welcome to return." Maya felt like the whole world was watching as the 2 security guards walked beside her toward the exit. Her legs felt shaky, and she was afraid she might fall down. The marble floor seemed to stretch on forever. As they walked, Richard called, out one more time, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "The Grand Vista Hotel apologizes to our valued guests for this disruption. We want everyone to know that we take security very seriously, and we will not tolerate anyone who tries to take advantage of our hospitality." Those words hit Maya harder than anything else that had happened. He was making it sound like she had tried to scam the hotel, when all she had done was try to check into a room she had legally reserved and paid for. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her as she walked toward the door. Some people looked sympathetic, but most just looked curious, like she was some kind of entertainment for them. She wondered what they were thinking. Did they believe Richard's version of events? Did they think she really was some kind of criminal? When they finally reached the glass doors, one of the security guards held it open for her. "Have a good day, miss," he said, but his voice was cold and professional. Maya walked outside and the door closed behind her with a soft whoosh. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not sure what to do next. People were walking by on the street going about their normal lives, completely unaware of what had just happened to her inside that beautiful hotel. She looked back through the glass doors and saw Richard talking to some guests, probably explaining why they had to witness such an unpleasant situation. She saw him gesture toward the door where she had just been escorted out, and the guests nodded like they understood completely. Maya finally made it to her car and got inside. As soon as she closed the door, the tears she had been holding back for the past hour started flowing. She cried for the humiliation, for the unfairness, for the way those people had looked at her like she was less than human. She cried for all the money she had saved for this weekend, money she would never get back. She cried for the celebration she had planned, the room service she had dreamed about, the feeling of luxury she had wanted to experience just once in her life. Most of all, she cried because she realized that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she achieved, there would always be people who would look at her and see someone who didn't belong, someone who wasn't good enough, someone who should know her place. Maya sat in her car outside the Grand Vista Hotel for a long time, crying and trying to understand how something so unfair could happen. She kept replaying every moment, wondering if there was something she could have done differently, but deep down she knew the truth. Nothing she could have said or done would have mattered to Richard Whitmore. He had made up his mind about her the moment he saw her. Finally, Maya started her car and drove away. She didn't look back at the hotel. She couldn't bear to see that beautiful building again, knowing how ugly the people inside could be. She drove, home in silence, trying to figure out how she was going to get through the rest of the weekend. The apartment that had felt too small before now felt like the only safe place in the world. At least there, nobody would judge her or make her feel like she didn't deserve to exist. Maya never told anyone what happened that day. The shame was too deep, the hurt too raw. She convinced herself that maybe if she never talked about it, she could pretend it never happened. But she knew she would carry that day with her forever. 3 days had passed since Maya's terrible experience at the Grand Vista Hotel. She had spent the weekend at home, trying to forget what happened, when her father James decided to make one of his surprise visits to check on his hotels. James Chen had built his hotel business from nothing. 30 years ago, he had arrived in this country with just 2 suitcases and a dream. He worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, and slowly built what was now a chain of luxury hotels. The Grand Vista was his pride and joy, the flagship property that represented everything he had worked for. James never announced his visits ahead of time. He believed the only way to see how his hotels really operated was to show up unannounced. He would dress simply, drive his old pickup truck instead of his expensive car, and walk in like any regular person. This way, he could see exactly how his staff treated guests when they thought nobody important was watching. On Tuesday morning, James parked his truck outside the Grand Vista Hotel. He was wearing jeans, work boots, and a simple button-down shirt. To anyone looking, he appeared to be a regular working man, maybe a contractor or maintenance worker. That was exactly how he wanted it. James walked through the same glass doors that Maya had been escorted through just 3 days earlier. He looked around the beautiful lobby that he had personally designed, checking to make sure everything was clean and welcoming. The marble floors were spotless, the flowers were fresh, and the soft music created the perfect atmosphere. He walked up to the front desk where Richard Whitmore was standing, looking as professional as always in his expensive suit. James had hired Richard 2 years ago based on his impressive resume and experience at other luxury hotels. Richard had always seemed competent during their brief meetings, though James had noticed he could be a bit stiff and formal. "Good morning," James said in his friendly voice. "I was wondering if I could speak with the manager about how things have been going here lately." Richard looked up from his computer, and immediately his expression changed. He saw a middle-aged man in work clothes with calloused hands and a slight accent. Richard's mind quickly categorized James as someone who probably didn't belong in a place like the Grand Vista. "The manager is very busy today," Richard said coldly. "If you're looking for work, you should try the service entrance around back. We're not hiring any maintenance staff right now." James was taken aback. He hadn't expected to be dismissed so quickly. "Actually, I'm not looking for work. I'm interested in discussing the hotel's operations. I have some questions about how guests are treated here." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but this is a high-end establishment. We don't have time to chat with every person who walks in off the street. If you're not a guest, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." James felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. This was the same tone, the same attitude that he had faced 30 years ago when people looked at him and saw only an immigrant who didn't belong. He had hoped those days were behind him, especially in his own hotel. "I understand this is a high-end hotel," James said calmly. "That's exactly why I'm here. I want to make sure the standards are being maintained properly." Richard laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "Standards? Sir, I think you might be confused about what kind of place this is. The Grand Vista caters to a very specific clientele. We have certain expectations about the type of people who stay here." James felt his stomach drop. The way Richard said, "type," of people reminded him of conversations he had hoped never to hear again. "What do you mean by that?" "I think you know exactly what I mean," Richard said. "We can't just let anyone walk in here and pretend they belong. Some people need to understand their place in the world." James was shocked. This was his hotel, built with his money, designed to welcome guests from all backgrounds. The idea that his own manager was turning people away based on how they looked made him feel sick. "Has this happened recently?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Have you had to turn people away?" Richard's chest puffed up with pride. "Just a few days ago, actually. There was this young woman who tried to check in. Clearly didn't belong here. She was dressed like a college kid, had this attitude like she deserved to be treated like royalty. I handled the situation perfectly." James felt his blood turning cold. "What do you mean you handled it?" "Well, she claimed to have a reservation, but I could tell something was off about the whole thing. People like that, they try to game the system, you know? They think they can just walk into a place like this and demand service." "People like what?" James asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Richard looked around to make sure nobody else was listening, then leaned forward. "You know, minorities, immigrants, people who don't understand how things work in places like this. They see our success and they think they deserve a piece of it." James felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Here was his own employee, in his own hotel, talking about people exactly like James himself, talking about his own daughter, though Richard didn't know it yet. "Tell me exactly what happened with this young woman," James said. Richard smiled, clearly enjoying the chance to tell his story. "She walked in here like she owned the place, had the nerve to demand a room, showed me some credit card that I knew had to be suspicious. So I followed protocol, called security, had them check her belongings, made sure she wasn't trying to pull some kind of scam." James felt dizzy. "You called security on a guest with a valid reservation?" "She wasn't a real guest," Richard said firmly. "Real guests don't look like that. They don't dress like that. They certainly don't act like they deserve to be here when they clearly don't have the class or breeding for a place like the Grand Vista." James wanted to grab Richard by the collar and shake him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Do you have security footage of this incident?" "Of course," Richard said proudly. "I always document these situations. You never know when someone might try to cause trouble later. Want to see how professionally I handled it?" James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Richard led him to the security office behind the front desk. James had installed the camera system himself, wanting to make sure his guests were always safe and his staff was always professional. Richard pulled up the footage from 3 days ago and pressed play. James watched in horror as he saw his daughter, Maya, walk into the hotel lobby, smiling with excitement. He watched as Richard's expression changed the moment he saw her. He watched as his daughter's joy turned to confusion, then hurt, then humiliation. "See how I handled it?" Richard said, pointing at the screen. "Firm but professional. She tried to argue with me, but I didn't let her get away with it. You have to be strong with people like that, or they'll walk all over you." James watched as security guards went through Maya's belongings in front of everyone. He saw the exact moment when his daughter's face crumpled with shame. He saw her trying not to cry as dozens of strangers stared at her like she was some kind of criminal. "She had a law degree," Richard continued, laughing. "Can you believe that? Probably printed it herself. These people think they can fool us with fake documents." James watched his daughter being escorted out of his hotel like a criminal. He saw her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back tears. He saw the moment when she finally made it to her car and broke down completely. "Turn it off," James said, quietly. "Pretty impressive, right?" Richard said, still smiling. "That's exactly how you deal with people who don't know their place. Firm boundaries, clear consequences. She won't be trying to come back here anytime soon." James stared at Richard for a long moment. This man had humiliated his daughter, had treated her like garbage, had made her feel like she was less than human. And he was proud of it. "Do you know who that young woman was?" James asked. "Some college kid trying to scam her way into a free room, probably." "Why do you ask?" James reached into his wallet and pulled out his business card. He handed it to Richard and watched as the man's face went from confusion to recognition to absolute terror. The business card read, "James Chen, owner and CEO, Grand Vista Hotel Group." Richard's face turned white. His hand started shaking as he looked from the business card to James's face and back again. "Mr. Chen? But you're..." "I'm what?" James asked calmly. "Not what you expected the owner to look like?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked at the security footage still frozen on the screen, showing Maya's face twisted with humiliation. "That young woman you just humiliated," James said, his voice deadly quiet, "is my daughter." Richard made a sound like all the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He grabbed the desk to keep from falling down. Your daughter? But I didn't... I thought..." "You thought what?" James asked. "That people who look like her don't deserve respect? That people who look like me don't belong in places like this? That's interesting, considering I built this place with my own 2 hands." Richard was shaking now. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Mr. Chen, I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known who she was..." "If you had known who she was, you would have treated her differently," James interrupted. "So you only treat people with respect if you think they're important? What about all the other guests who don't look the way you think they should look?" Richard couldn't answer. He knew there was nothing he could say that would make this situation better. James looked at the man who had made his daughter cry, who had made her feel ashamed of who she was, who had treated her like she was worthless. And he made a decision that would change everything. James stared at Richard for what felt like forever. The security footage was still frozen on the screen, showing Maya's face full of pain and humiliation. James could feel 30 years of memories flooding back, all the times people had looked at him the same way Richard had looked at Maya, all the doors that had been slammed in his face, all the times he had been told he didn't belong. But this was different. This was his own hotel, his own employee, his own daughter. "Mr. Chen," Richard stammered, his voice shaking. "Please, let me explain. I was just following hotel policy. I was trying to protect the reputation of the Grand Vista." James turned around slowly to face Richard. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but deadly serious. "Whose policy? I thought it was company policy to be selective about our guests." Show me where it says that in our employee handbook, James said. Show me where it says to judge people by how they look or what they're wearing. Richard's face was getting redder. By the second, sweat was dripping down his forehead. Well, it's not written down exactly, but everyone knows that hotels like this. Everyone knows what? James interrupted. That we should treat people differently based on the color of their skin? That we should assume someone is a criminal because they're young or dressed casually? Is that what everyone knows? Richard couldn't answer. He knew anything he said would only make things worse. James walked over to the security monitor and pressed play again. He watched his daughter's face crumple as Richard told her she didn't belong. He watched her trying to maintain her dignity as security guards went through her personal belongings in front of strangers. Do you have children, Richard? James asked quietly. Yes, sir. 2 daughters. How would you feel if someone treated your daughters the way you treated mine? Richard's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he seemed to understand the weight of what he had done. I would be devastated. You humiliated my daughter in front of dozens of people. You made her feel like she was worthless. You took what should have been one of the happiest weekends of her life and turned it into a nightmare. James's voice was getting stronger with each word. And you did it because you decided, based on nothing but her appearance, that she didn't deserve to be treated like a human being. Richard was crying now. Mr. Chen, I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please give me another chance. I'll do anything to make this right. James shook his head. A mistake is forgetting to order fresh flowers or double booking a conference room. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to be cruel to my daughter because you thought you could get away with it. James walked to the desk and picked up the phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. Yes, this is James Chen. I need you to prepare termination paperwork for Richard Whitmore, manager of the Grand Vista Hotel, effective immediately. He paused, listening to the response. Yes, I'm sure, and I need you to do the same for the 2 security guards who were working last Saturday. Their names should be in the incident report. Richard fell into a chair, his head in his hands. Please, Mr. Chen. I have a family. I have a mortgage. I need this job. James hung up the phone and turned back to Richard. My daughter needed to be treated with respect. She needed to feel safe and welcome in what should have been a place of hospitality. But you decided your prejudices were more important than her dignity. I'll change, Richard pleaded. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll apologize to your daughter personally. Just please don't destroy my career over this. You destroyed your own career the moment you decided to treat my daughter like garbage, James replied. But this isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure this never happens again to anyone. James picked up the phone again and called his corporate office. I need you to schedule mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees at every property, starting immediately. And I want new hiring policies that emphasize respect for all guests, regardless of their background or appearance. While James was on the phone, Richard sat silently, realizing his life was about to change forever. He thought about his daughters and wondered if he had ever taught them to treat people the way he had treated Maya. The thought made him sick. After James finished his calls, he turned back to Richard one more time. I want you to understand something. I came to this country with nothing. I worked in kitchens, cleaned offices, did whatever I could to survive. People like you looked at me and saw someone who didn't matter. Someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Richard nodded, unable to look James in the eye. I built this business not just to make money, but to create places where everyone could feel valued and welcome. Every single person who walks through those doors should be treated like they matter because they do matter. You violated everything this company stands for. James walked toward the door, then stopped. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. Take only your personal belongings. After Richard was escorted out of the hotel, James stood alone in the lobby he had designed with so much hope and pride. He thought about Maya, probably at home trying to forget what had happened to her. He thought about all the other people who might have been treated the same way by Richard and his staff. James pulled out his phone and called Maya. It rang several times before she answered. Hi, Dad. Is everything okay? James's heart broke at the sound of her voice. She sounded tired and sad, not like the excited recent graduate she had been just a few days ago. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Did something happen to you this weekend?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. James could hear Maya breathing, and he knew she was trying to decide whether to tell him the truth. "Maya, please. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Finally, Maya's voice came through the phone, small and broken. "Dad, I went to celebrate my graduation at this hotel, and they treated me like I was some kind of criminal. They went through my things in front of everyone and kicked me out like I was garbage." James closed his eyes and felt tears running down his face. "Which hotel, sweetheart?" "The Grand Vista." "Dad, it was so humiliating. I saved for months to stay there, and they made me feel like I didn't deserve to exist. Maya, I need you to come here right now." "Dad, I can't go back there. I can't face those people again. Trust me, honey, everything is going to be different now." An hour later, Maya walked through the glass doors of the Grand Vista Hotel with her father beside her. The staff behind the front desk immediately recognized James and greeted him with respect and professionalism. "This is my daughter, Maya," James announced to the entire lobby. "She's going to be staying in our presidential suite for the weekend, and I want everyone to know that she deserves the same respect and courtesy we give to every guest." The new manager, a kind woman named Patricia who had been promoted from another property, personally escorted Maya to her room. The suite was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and fresh flowers on every table. "Ms. Chen," Patricia said, "I want to apologize on behalf of the entire Grand Vista staff for what happened to you. That kind of treatment goes against everything we believe in, and I promise you it will never happen again." Maya looked around the beautiful room and felt tears in her eyes. But this time they were different tears. These were tears of relief and gratitude. That evening, James and Maya had dinner together in the hotel restaurant. Other guests recognized them, and some came over to introduce themselves, treating Maya with the warmth and respect she should have received from the beginning. "Dad," Maya said as they shared dessert, "thank you for believing me. Thank you for making this right. Maya, you should never have had to go through that. But I want you to know that your experience is going to help make sure other people don't have to suffer the same way." Over the following weeks, James implemented major changes throughout his hotel chain. Every employee received training on treating all guests with dignity and respect. New policies were put in place to prevent discrimination, and Maya was offered a position on the company's board of directors, where she could help ensure that the values of equality and inclusion were built into every aspect of the business. 6 months later, Maya was back at the Grand Vista Hotel, but this time she was there for a board meeting. As she walked through the lobby, she saw families of all backgrounds checking in and being treated with genuine warmth and hospitality. A young woman who looked a lot like Maya had on that terrible day approached the front desk with her reservation. Maya watched as the staff greeted her with smiles and professionalism, never questioning her right to be there. Maya smiled to herself, knowing that her painful experience had led to something positive. The humiliation she had suffered had been transformed into a force for change, ensuring that future guests would be judged not by how they looked, but by their character and humanity. The Grand Vista Hotel had become what James had always intended it to be. A place where everyone was truly welcome, where dignity and respect weren't privileges to be earned, but rights to be guaranteed. And Maya knew that her father's dream had finally become reality.